The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to this month's Alcor webinar, Leveraging Real-Time Operational Intelligence with Alcor and Incorta. We will be beginning in just a minute. Alcor is pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar. Alcor is a global digital transformation services company serving Fortune 500 government agencies and other leading organizations in multiple industry verticals across US, Canada, Europe, Japan, and India. Alcor advises leading businesses on cloud platforms, digital workflows, technology and robotic automation, enterprise service management, HR, integrated risk management, and data and analytics. We also provide business process consulting to capture, re-engineer, and improve processes that can easily be automated to deliver real value. The Alcor consulting team has excellence in business strategy, cloud technology, and organizational change management. Alcor is a ServiceNow Elite partner, AWS partner, and Oracle Gold partner, and also works with Azure, Salesforce, Incorta, Tanium, and several other cutting-edge technologies. For today's webinar, Alcor has partnered with Incorta, our premier data and analytics partner. Incorta is the only unified data analytics platform powered by direct data mapping, purpose-built to help companies stay ahead of the accelerating rate, volume, and complexity of modern enterprise data. The platform delivers unmatched speed and visibility. We have time reserved at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please feel free to type any questions into the questions section of the webinar dashboard, and I will make every attempt to ask our panelists those questions and get them answered. Today's webinar topic is enabling unparalleled visibility to achieve business continuity, really by leveraging real-time operational intelligence. The webinar is presented by our two panelists that are Mike Nader, Head of Channels at Incorta, and Manoj Singhal, Principal at Alcor. My name is Amit Singh. I am the CEO of Alcor as well as the host for today's webinar. With that, I would love for Mike and Manoj to briefly introduce themselves.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much, Mick. Mick, can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. So everybody, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today. My name is Mike Nader with Incorta. Just a very brief background on myself. Been in the analytics space for about 23 years. Started my career building systems for the Office of Finance, but have worked in a variety of both horizontals across various vertical industries, and worked with a myriad technologies from Oracle to SAP to Tableau to Alteryx, and of course quite a bit on Incorta. I've been with Incorta for about 3 years, and as Amit mentioned earlier, I head up our channels organization and work directly with our partners as both a go-to-market and technical resource. Manoj?
Thank you, Mike, and welcome. Thank you, Amit. Hello, everyone. This is Manoj Singhal. And for the last 30 years, I have helped global clients with transformation, technology adoption, and data monetization. And look forward to a great discussion today.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike and Manoj. So in terms of the topics that we intend to cover today, we really looked at what's really topical and, so what's the state of the market that we are seeing, and really focus on how does one leverage data in the best possible way to respond to market disruptions. And disruptions aren't only pandemic kind of disruptions, which happen once every 100 years or so, but there are a lot of disruptions that happen due to either geopolitical events or business events and such. And when one does need to be ready to be to respond to these market disruptions, and using data on how to do it best is what we want to talk about today. We would then talk about how does one allocate resources in this current market and economy to support, right, aggregation of that data to respond to market situations. What are the key aspects of technology and analytics that one needs to focus on? What are the critical components of the strategy that one needs to think of and focus on? And finally, what is the role of governance? And we will make this very interactive between our two panelists, both of them taking a shot at their thoughts on what they think about these topics. And as I said earlier, we will end this with questions. So feel free to start typing questions on any of these slides as you have them. And I will be going over them in the end. So if I were to, Mike, if I were to start with you, and what would you think is the state of the market today in terms of data analytics? How do people do? What are folks looking at?
Well, and I appreciate you, giving me some prompts ahead of time as well, just so I could get some of a background on the types of questions. And I look at the clients I've worked with, and I'm still in contact with, a lot of the clients I've done systems for and do work at Incorta. A lot of it in their mind is how to respond to disruption. Of course, we have a current disruption happening with all of us, but if I go back a year, we had a trade war. If I go back prior to that, it was something else. If we go forward a year or 2 or 10, there's always going to be a continual disruption to what we would like to be the status quo. And so what I'm getting from clients is really how do we create a continuity in our strategy so we can support the business in a proper way. I don't know, Manoj, are you hearing similar? Manoj, you are.
I'm on. Yes, Mike.
So on the Manoj, I guess the question back on your side is what are you hearing on your clients, from your clients?
Oh, certainly, because there are different kind of events, as Amit mentioned, which happen once in a while or which happens in a recurring way. People have the playbook for some events and some disruption, and for some, they learn as they manage the disruption. And that is where I think they are having a need for data and insight to have the right options.
Wonderful. And in terms of modern data cultures, Mike, I remember you and I have talked about that. What have you seen? There you go.
Well, when you and I were talking about some of these topics prior to today's session, I mean, one of the I just doing a little research and wanted to pull from a neutral organization, and that, okay, we've got McKinsey. They do a lot of market analysis, and while this is a 2018 study, nonetheless, I don't think it's any less relevant today. In fact, I would argue that it's likely more relevant today, and the numbers would be better. And that if we look at companies, and you're going to hear me talk a lot today about culture. You're going to hear me talk about a culture of curiosity when it comes to the nature of how I think you should approach analytics with your user community and frankly with your IT teams. Mm-hmm. But also, what does it mean to really set up a modern data culture? What are the outcomes that you can expect? And I 100% agree with these numbers, in that you're going to see organizations that use their data better are going to do significantly better. I mean, that's fairly a fairly obvious statement, but I think it's material. It is not going to just be they're going to do 10% better. They're going to do materially better with the decisions they make and with the ROI they drive from their investments. Whether it's based on McKinsey's research, we're looking at massive increases in net income. But what the challenge is today is that the vast majority of organizations that I've worked with, and that even in McKinsey's study, is they don't feel satisfied with the way they've approached analytics. I'm going to go back to that concept of continuity. How do we build something that can really support and adapt and be agile in today's market, but the market that's going to be in place 6 months, 6 years, 10 years from now?
And given that, right, how are businesses reacting? There you go. Because there's the whole point of this crisis management, and I think that's really the underpinning here on how, instead of doing crisis management, getting war rooms every time and then losing that knowledge over time, and rinse and repeat. How does one develop new capabilities, and what are those new capabilities to build this resilience?
Well, and Manoj, maybe I'll let you chime in here. I mean, that's been, you and I've had multiple conversations on this in respect to, what I've really personally seen between the two, but I won't steal your thunder here.
Sure. So Amit, how the business react? The first reaction is to find the answer, what can we do?
Right.
And to find out what are the options with us. And more importantly, how can we forecast the impact of our decisions? Now, there is a tradition of setting up a war room because that brings people together, their experience together, and more importantly, their information together. Because the data never used to be centralized, never used to be available across the organization in the same way. But today, that is where the data helps. And more we try to create options, simulate scenarios with data, we become data hungry. And once we become data hungry, we need more data. Your internal resource source of data as well as external source of data. You mentioned, tariff. That means you are to have a data set of economic, data set of different geographies. You mentioned pandemic. That means you need to have a health data. How is the readiness of a state or a city or the impact of the pandemic there? So, and that is, once you become data hungry, you bring all sort of data together, you try to simulate it, and that is where the challenge starts for technology, time, and skill.
That's very true. Yes, indeed. And as thank you. As I was coming to the point that you made about, even in today's world, there are challenges to agility. War rooms are not just a thing of past. I think a lot of organizations do them even today. So what are those challenges? You touched upon them on the last slide a little bit, but disparate sources and such. So if you can elaborate on that.
Yes. So as we started our discussion, right? If it is a event, let's say one-time event, hurricane happened or tsunami happened, there's a disruption in supply chain or disruption in office working. But we know that it has happened and now the damage is there and now we need to restore it. Our internal data sources may help. But when the events keep unfolding, like a tariff war, you don't know what happened, how the policies will impact, how the countries will react, or it's a pandemic, you don't know. In that scenario, you need to be agile to take decisions for your employees, for your stakeholder, for your customers, for your products, for your operations. But data does not support you with that agility. And why? Because your data lies in various sources, and to bring it together needs time, effort, skills with the traditional tools. And more so, you need to get a trust in that data, that whatever you are getting is complete or with the quality, so that your decisions are not wrong. And that brings the part of the governance. So either we do it one time and we spend years, or we create, a sort of culture of experimentation, so that everyone respect data, everyone becomes the steward of data, everyone has access of data, and everyone get to know the data and use the data. Mike, what do you say on this?
What I agree 100% on the technical challenges here. When Manoj, or excuse me, Amit, earlier you asked about resource allocation, and I think we can think of it a couple different ways. We absolutely have to think about how do we allocate resources to solve this nature of challenge, but I think it's beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about comparing to what a modern, what I would say agile analytic strategy compared to a traditional approach, and we've all implemented dozens and dozens of traditional approaches over the years. It really looks like this. And from my perspective, you've got, what was the visibility that we provided historically speaking to the user community? It was traditionally limited to subsets of data. You presuppose questions. What I'd argue is that to really be successful, you have to provide much more granular and much more broad access to the information. I mean, Manoj a moment ago mentioned the concept of trust. For me, data trust, and it's a phrase I use somewhat frequently when I have conversations about analytics. It's not just about understanding and having faith in the processes that got the information to you, but it's being able to say why and answer the why question. Why is this happening? What's the root cause? I want to get to the details.
Mm-hmm.
And the trust in that data. So if I've got a number of 1 million at the top line and I want to get down to the individual transactions that tie into it, I have to be able to do that. That's what generates data trust for the user. I mean, historically, our activities for users have been look at these reports and make decisions from them. That's not analysis. That's just consuming a report that somebody already built for you. That really doesn't work when you're trying to build a strategy that supports continuity. From an adaptability perspective, historically, it's okay, next week or next month or next year, I can get you all of these changes. In a modern approach, it has to be today. If somebody asks for something, that's likely important. And you will hear me talk about, if you've ever worked with me on a project, I focus really very heavily on what the user needs are, because that's who we're building this for. So, going all the way back to your question on resource allocation, where I believe we should focus those resources are on the things that make the user's life simpler. Now, historically, we focus quite heavily on systematic processes and all kinds of things to codify the information. I'm not saying those are not important, they absolutely are. But I don't want us to forget that the focus of what we're doing here and the why we build these strategies are so smart users can make good decisions for our organizations. And a lot of the focus, from my perspective, should be put there.
Very true. And one could almost argue, Mike, that especially in times of disruption, but even otherwise, the focus on systems always led to well, let's do a meeting to collect requirements, and then let's go back and look at data types, and then let's go build data warehouses, and 1 year from now, we'll be ready to give you the information that you needed today.
Yeah.
Moving
And
from that to users, which is, hey, I don't want ABC. I changed my mind. I want XYZ, but I want it today.
yeah.
Because my business needs it today. And that is why I like the idea of having the resource allocation really focusing on users and the business's needs today.
Well, and the reality is I've spent years working with one client in particular, and they were going down the path of we're going to try to build this massive data warehouse, this one focused, and they used the phrase single source of truth. And I will tell you right now that is my least favorite phrase in all of analytics. And it's not because it's not important to have, again, codified and trusted processes, but because it is in some ways becomes the goal when really it should be a supporting concept. And frankly, it's almost impossible, if not impossible, to achieve. And let me give you an example of what I mean there. And don't worry about the fact that you can't read all of the text in these boxes, or maybe any of it. That's not the important part. The very top box, by the way, is net income. I built this out a couple of months ago because I was having a conversation with somebody about what does it mean to have a key performance indicator or a single metric. And those kind of things don't exist. Net income is made up of operating income and taxes and interest expense, and that's further made up of other KPIs and further made up of other metrics, et cetera. And as you change colors here, you're changing systems. And as the business needs to analyze, not report, but analyze information, those colors will change, or those metrics will change. And as the market demands agility and adaptability, those colors will change, the metrics will change. And so it gets very, very difficult to try to build a structure that is going to be the be all end all for this. But if you focus on building those things that really help the user community, and you leverage sets of technologies that support that new agility and process, that's when your world can really start to change from an analytics perspective.
Very well said. Yes, and it sort of refocuses the point single source of truth is a very relative term.
Well, it is. I mean, I don't want to go down too much of a rat hole with the term, because again, I'm not insulting in the slightest or eschewing the importance of master data and good process. Those are important, but the goal is to support the user community. I mean, one more, and I promise I'll actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw a couple more slides up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, historically, let me give you one more view of it. This is how I have, prior to working with Incorta, this is what I would walk through when I'm working with clients, is, or even users, and users have experienced this, but the user has a question, they walk through a process where they talk to, maybe it's IT, maybe it's a business systems team, doesn't matter. They have to talk to somebody to get that data. That person or people work to getting the data in. They, behind the scenes, do a level of manipulation that the users may or may not be purview to. And then finally it's given out to the users, and then that process repeats itself over and over again, and it takes time, and time is of course money. And it's also lost decisions. And so what we really need to move to is, I've got a question and I've got the ability to do it, as I said today, but it's got to be there at your fingertips. Now that's an enormous amount of work, or responsibility, I should say, from a data stewardship perspective, in that you need to have it there, but you need to trust and inform your users, because this is the goal of what you should go to, from a process to a process, where we're at, or where we've historically been at the top, and down to the the future state on the bottom. A quick story, just to drive this home a little bit, and one of our clients, but Broadcom. Broadcom is the epitome in my mind of really making that process change and really adapting to a new way of thinking and really a new data estate. They use their data in a very real and very strategic fashion to drive their business forward. I mean, they have more than doubled their data access. They have cut down their staffing required. And that doesn't mean they removed people to do this. What that means is they took the time that those people were spending in the historical process, and now they're focused on more strategic things like their MDM, their master data strategy, excuse the acronym, and their security. I mean, you're talking about an organization that is, you know, billions upon billions of dollars in market capitalization, running almost 100 data refreshes a day and handing out information to hundreds, if not thousands, of users who are working in a very agile fashion to answer key strategic questions and make operational decisions for this organization.
And they're answering it today. They're answering it as the users need it. Yeah, Manoj, any thoughts on really that value differentiator? You know, obviously, in the last slide, we looked at two different approaches. There is the traditional data warehouse approach, and there is the user-faced, you know, your user, face, approach that Incorta and Alcor have proposed. Any thoughts you want to share on that?
Oh, sure. I think Mike made a great point here, because the reality is of any business is that data lies distributed in different functions, in different systems, in different applications, or even in Excel sheets. And the reality of today is that you may need the data which is coming from outside. So every time to go through a single source of truth works as a speed breaker in a way for you to utilize that data.
Right.
The new approach is, how can we create that stewardship of the data? I give you an example of our client, right, for bankers' performance. And they don't trust that the CRM is complete. That is not a single source of data. Idea is, how can we enhance that CRM data with their mail data or with their expense data or with anything which their bankers are doing to create a complete picture, rather than waiting that, okay, till the time the CRM data is complete, I will have the better picture. So, and the first approach is to go on the top, okay, make my CRM data complete, or the second is, okay, give me a tool which can combine all the data available and I can do some quick decision making with the quick insights. So data to insight, how can we collapse the time and bring the experimentation with the user? I think that is where the culture is going today.
Very well said. Yes. Yes. So, Mike, we in the other slide that you had, we talked obviously about Broadcom, and then I know you're planning to really take the discussion forward from key we talked about allocating resources. We talked about key aspects, in these two slides. What are the other, things like critical components of analytics strategy and role of governance that you would like to share on this webinar?
Well, I appreciate that question as well. I mean, and I think you've heard me say multiple times on the, my focus is on the users side. And here's the way I will always try to guide the conversation with clients. And it's going to be, my three guiding principles are really the ones up top. Technology is a foundational component, but it is plumbing. Meaning that technology in and of itself does not allocate or does not set up an analytic strategy. You have smart people. You hired smart people as an organization. That's your goal. If you give smart people the right access to the right information, give them the freedom to ask questions, then they're going to make the right decisions for you. And that's really what you should be doing. I mean, and you'll see on the upper right there, the concept of the culture of curiosity. What users have to be empowered to do is to take risks. And they have to be empowered to do that without, the fear of, or being told no all the time. All of your data is not going to be perfect. Trust that you can tell people, your smart people, that, all right, I'm going to give you access to this billion rows of information. Here's all of your accounts receivable. We noticed a couple of anomalies. Here they are. They can take those into consideration. Inform them, trust them. And please understand that the nuance of what I mean here. I'm not, again, saying do not have the concept of data governance. You need it. But what I am asking you to do sometimes is take a leap. And in fact, I'm going to steal a quote from Patrick Golay, a gentleman I work with, and he and I were chatting about this a few days ago, and he brought this up. He said, Mike, really what you're doing is you're asking people to take a leap, but not to be fearless, because fearless can lead to problems. No, be cautious, understand your information, but be willing, have the courage to take a leap and to ask those questions that before you either didn't ask or kept getting told no every time you tried to ask them because the data wasn't available. Those are the ones that are really where your next major leap forward as an organization is, where you're going to find that major cost saving, or you're going to find the next great client that you didn't realize were as profitable as they are. And so I will always tell you, you want to let your users be your guide. Whatever you build, you are building this for the user community. You live and die on the opinions of the end users, no matter how elegant the solution is built. If they do not use it, it's a rock in a corner. It's not useful to you. When I talk to clients about the concept of the single version of the truth, I say focus on what's obtainable. You can never build a system that is going to be able to adapt to any potential data challenge. So you have to know they're there, and it's a constant process. You have to really be a constant gardener about it. Weeds are going to pop up, you've got to pull them, you've got to work with them. And that flexibility that you provide to the users is going to lead to knowledge. It's going to lead to knowledge for them, and that they're able to make really good decisions. But it's also going to lead to knowledge for the back-end systems teams, and that, there's no such thing in my mind as dirty data. We hear that phrase a lot. It doesn't exist. There is data that comes in, and if that data does not conform to some level of strategy or some rule that you put to it, one of your systems is generating that. So it, in and of itself, informs an analytic decision. But inform your users as to what you've got. And really, I would opt for agility over perfection and really focus on that again and again and again. So answering both of your questions there, Amit, but
wonderful.
But that's really
yes.
how I look at that.
Yes, that's really what an insight-driven enterprise is like. I mean, nobody, I guess, is arguing about, that one may need multiple approaches for data, but really what the users need is immediate. It's insights, right? And then one has to let the users guide as you build your data strategies.
Yes.
Moving forward towards the role of governance, and I know, Mike, you do have a teaser demo as well for Incorta for our attendees. So would love for Manoj and you to really talk a little bit from a governance perspective, and then a lot of it is on this slide, right? Being a constant gardener and looking at agility. But Manoj, any other thoughts on this, as well as on the strategy piece?
Sure. I think governance becomes more important as well as redundant at the same time if we have the data distributed across the organizations. It becomes important because you want to bring it together at one place, and that means it is going through the steps and messaging and you don't know what was initial and what came at the end. So somebody need to govern that process and govern those players and govern the outcome of that process. But if you have a very elegant way to get the data as it is in its original context, in original relevance, and in original form, and can still make it analytics ready, I think that is where the distributed data becomes, the governance become redundant.
Yeah, I would agree.
Very nicely said.
I'll tell you what, if you don't mind, Amit, let me just, as you mentioned, I don't want to make this about a bunch of clicks in a piece of software, but let me show you something, just for a sec, just a couple of moments, and then I do want to actually talk about a client that did something exactly different from Broadcom, but exactly like we're talking about here. But as you mentioned earlier, and Manoj, you just mentioned, a way in which to provide access to that information in its context. Now, what you're looking at here, this is a dashboard. Obviously, it's a dashboard, but the concept of the bar charts or the line charts and the KPIs, none of that is unique. We could do that any number of ways. But really, when we talk about the ability to be agile, is that I will tell you this dashboard was set up in 10 minutes. And the important thing here is this dashboard was also set up and it hits 3 different data sources. And that whole setup took about 20 minutes. And the other neat thing here is if I look down here at the bottom, in this bottom table, this is 9 million sales transactions all sitting here. I can scroll through them 1,000 at a time. But that is the transactional data that fed into this information. And as a user, I could build something brand new very quickly, click that plus there. But if I want to understand what's driving a number, I want to know why I've got, this 524,000 in California, or million, excuse me, 524. Or I want to understand what is driving in, Fender sales right here. If I click on that, it drives right down to the number, and in this case, the 25,000 transactions that tie into it. And I can do it with a click, but users also are used to being able to search, right? They want to know what's happening in, maybe Washington State, and they want to understand a certain category or subcategory of product, and then understand that, okay, here's my number. Here's my trend as the weather trends, different data source. Here are my KPIs, and here are the same values, and here are the 21,831 transactions that tie into it. And they want that level of response because that's what they're used to doing today in their life. If my son asks me a question, Dad, what is this or how does that work? My response very often is, why don't you use that supercomputer that's in your pocket, aka your phone, and look it up, because information's at our fingertips. You shouldn't accept less in the world of business. And we run weekly demos. We're happy to get into details. And the intent today is not to get into the whole process here, but I want you to understand that it's possible and that we have clients that are doing it very successfully. We mentioned Broadcom earlier. I want to talk about one other, and then I'll go back to Manoj for a minute. And that's Shutterfly. Shutterfly is a story we tell quite a bit at Incorta, and that I think it was 2016 or 2017 in their Q4. They had an issue with out of stock incidents, and if I would suspect that most of the audience is familiar, but Shutterfly is an online retailer of a variety of things, of calendars and mugs, and really, so they manufacture and they retail to the public, and their biggest, most profitable time of year is Q4. And if they run out of stock on certain items on their manufacturing side, it costs them quite a bit of money on margin, because they have to either outsource that or idle the supply chain, or idle the manufacturing line, where bringing inventory in, and they can only, like any other organization, can only afford to maintain X amount of inventory. And so they really need visibility. Year one, they had X amount of out of stock incidents. The next year, they used Incorta during Q4, and they gave it to their supply chain analysts. They cut their out of stock incidents 90%. And were able to materially drive dollars to the bottom line, operating revenues to the bottom line, in not having to outsource and not having to churn customers. But the important part of the story is, I'm going to go back to, is not Incorta, it is what Shutterfly did. They had smart people who got the right information, were armed with the right information, and then made really good business decisions. And they built out a culture that encouraged that culture of curiosity, encouraged their teams to ask questions and to really be analytical in the way they approach things. And their results were dramatic. That is really, I shouldn't say my favorite or second favorite story, but I love what they were able to do with good people using data in the right way. Manoj, I'll toss it back to you, and I know we want to leave a few minutes for questions. I'll go ahead and toss it back to you just to come back to the data platform side, and then we can open up on the questions.
Yeah, certainly, Mike. And I think today enterprise data lies on Workday Cloud, ServiceNow Cloud, SAP Cloud, Oracle Cloud, or on their own desktops and servers and data centers. So there is a choice whether it's a hard way to keep wrangling data, managing it, consolidating it, analyzing, and then throw it to the user, or there is a smart way to have the right technology in place that can combine that data, any data set, experiment with it, and bring the, as you show, right from the operational data or transactional data to the insight with all the fidelity. So I think
and really what we're showing here, this is the goal, systematically speaking as well. But again, my focus has always been and really will always be on the user community. So I really appreciate just even the conversation, and Manoj, and I appreciate all of your time and questions. Did we want to see if there are any questions in the audience? I don't want to monopolize.
There are a few questions, but we have time for a quick if you want to go over to the platform and really talk about the secret sauce, then joining the tables at scale and the speed of response, because obviously the platform can get compared to a visualization platform like Tableau. At times it can get compared to a data warehouse approach as well, right? So but really I think this slide encapsulates it. The value here is users can get information that is in the source systems at scale, without lag. If I were to say so.
And at fidelity. It is truly a process difference.
Yes.
And that is what I would encourage. Incorta is a unified data analytics platform. The intention is to provide a place to go to really perform those analytic activities. And it'd be too much to get into today to talk about direct data mapping and machine learning or all of the other capabilities built in. But we do have weekly demonstrations, and we have that in just a second, a slide that gives you a follow-on activity to say, look, if you're really interested, we would love to talk to you in more detail about it. And you can get on and see how the platform operates in an open Q&A fashion. We run those every week. Or we can, if you work with the team at Alcor, I'll personally get on and do one for you, and with the team at Alcor. But happy to get into that.
Perfect.
It's a little more time. I don't know whether there are other specific questions we can jump into.
Yeah, there are a few questions here. So start with a question related to how does Incorta compare, and that is, how would you compare the Incorta solution to a Tableau solution?
Well, we have clients that use Tableau on top of Incorta. Now, I happen to show you just very quickly on the front end perspective here. That's a visualization front end. The value add of what Incorta does is shrinking this process. And we have clients that leverage Power BI on top of Incorta and Tableau on top of Incorta and MicroStrategy on top of Incorta. So if I had to pick something, what I really want you to focus on is not the fact that I did a line chart, cool, but the fact that we can pull all that information together, and that what used to take weeks can be done in hours. What used to be done in months can be done in days, and years can be done in a week. That's the difference. And so Incorta truly is a platform and a data engine at its core. Tableau, great technology, adaptive dynamic data visualization. You want to put that on top of Incorta by all means. Let Tableau query billions of records, but let Incorta hand Tableau all the answers, so it's doing it at fidelity, and it's doing it in a fraction of a second.
Well said, and that has been one of the reasons why we've been so impressed with the technology, working at multiple clients, and really disruption, which was really the topical issue that we are addressing, brings a lot of these things to the fore. It's about, hey, can something hit our business today? And today we need the answers, not a week later, not a month later. We don't have time for a structured response approach, but we have to respond.
Yes.
So that's, yep.
Again,
Go ahead.
you have smart people. As long as you let them know what they're looking at, inform them.
Yeah.
They'll make decisions for you.
Very good. And a couple more questions here from the audience. What are the top, and we talked about this a little bit, but what are the top 2 or 3 reasons people implement Incorta?
Well, it really, I think, goes back to that data visibility construct, in that there is no concept of a single system that holds the data that's important to your analytic line of questioning. One KPI, again, leads to another, leads to another. And so a way to bring those together, but without having to take the time to constantly model and remodel and do everything. What people are doing in Incorta, if I'm just reporting on one system, almost any system you buy, you leverage, has the ability to report on one thing. What Incorta does is very quickly take data that you deem most important, your real operational drivers and financial drivers of your company, can pull them together and give you access in a minuscule fraction of the time you could historically have done it, and respond and provide access in a responsive fashion. You're talking literally seconds from a query perspective, even on billions of rows of data. And so that's really why people gravitate towards it. It is a mixture of a number of things, and hence like the Tableau question earlier. It's not an uncommon one. Incorta's value is in the engine and the way we hold that and pull it all together. But the value people get out of it is what the business users do with it, like what Shutterfly did with it.
Perfect. Yes. And another question, which I think I'll ask Manoj, and Mike, you're welcome to chime in. Given the client base, Manoj, what is the biggest challenge that you've seen in those clients leveraging data as an asset?
I think 3 things. One certainly is the technology, and the other is the skills required. So people have the technology, they don't have the skill to use that technology to serve their internal customers. And so that's why the whole culture is now shifting towards the self-service, where the business can be empowered and enabled to experiment and use with the data. And that is a major paradigm shift within the culture in the organization.
Very good point. Yes, and one does need a combination of be clear about what you want, and be be well informed of what technology can get you there. Because without both of those questions being accurately answered, the chances that you will end where you want it to be are not as high, as otherwise they would be. So excellent, well said. Well, thank you, Mike and Manoj. Very insightful webinar. Thanks for answering the questions.
Really appreciate it. Really appreciate all of your time and the audience. Thank you for attending today.
Absolutely. And to the audience, thanks everyone for joining. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. And for now, have a great rest of your week and a great weekend. Bye now.